The sterile beep of the heart monitor was the only thing keeping Sarah grounded as a contraction ripped through her body, a pain so blinding it felt like her spine was snapping in two. Triplets. High risk. And yet the chair next to her bed at St. Mary's Memorial Hospital was empty. Her husband Richard wasn't holding her hand. He was in the hallway, his voice hushed, frantic, but not with worry for his unborn children. Through the crack in the door, Sarah saw the flash of a pen, the glint of a velvet box, and a woman who definitely wasn't a nurse. In the most vulnerable moment of her life, Sarah wasn't just losing blood. She was losing her entire world to a signature that would cost her everything until the heavy oak doors swung open and Justice walked in, wearing a black robe. Sarah Bennett gripped the cold metal railing of the hospital bed until her knuckles turned white, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. The labor had started 3 weeks early, a chaotic rush of broken water and panic that had landed her in the high-dependency unit of St. Mary's Memorial Hospital in downtown Chicago. These weren't just any babies. They were triplets, a miracle pregnancy after years of heartache and failed IVF treatments that had drained their savings and nearly broken her spirit. "Breathe, Sarah, breathe," Nurse Crowley said, her voice a steady anchor in the storm of pain. She wiped a damp cloth across Sarah's forehead, her eyes darting to the monitors that tracked 3 tiny erratic heartbeats. "You're doing great, honey. Dr. Reynolds is on his way down from surgery. Just hold on." Sarah nodded, unable to speak, her eyes scanning the room for the 100th time in the last hour. The room was filled with medical equipment, sterile wraps, and the terrifying promise of an emergency C-section if things didn't progress naturally, but it lacked the one thing she needed most. Richard, her husband of 10 years, the man who had promised to be her rock, was nowhere to be found. He had driven her to the hospital, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, complaining about the traffic on I-90, and worrying aloud about missing a critical conference call with the investors from Zurich. When they had wheeled her into triage, he had patted her leg, muttered something about needing to move the car, and vanished. That was 2 hours ago. "Where is he?" Sarah whispered the words, scraping her throat. He said he was just moving the Tesla." Nurse Crowley exchanged a look with the younger nurse, adjusting the IV drip. It was a look of pity, the kind that stung worse than the contractions. "I'm sure he's just caught up in admissions, sweetie. It's a busy night." But Sarah knew Richard. Richard didn't get caught up. Richard Bennett was a man who optimized every second of his existence. He was a rising star in corporate liquidation, a man who could dismantle a 100-year-old family business over a lunch break and not lose his appetite. He was precise, controlling, and lately incredibly distant. Another wave of pain crashed over her, and Sarah let out a guttural cry, her back arching off the mattress. "Pressure is dropping on baby, the younger nurse said urgently, tapping the screen. "We need him in here, now." "I'll page him again," Nurse Crowley said, stepping out into the corridor. Through the haze of pain, Sarah turned her head toward the open door. The hallway was bright fluorescent and busy. She expected to see doctors running or families pacing. Instead, she saw a familiar silhouette standing near the vending machines about 30 feet away. It was Richard. He wasn't filling out forms. He wasn't arguing with insurance. He was standing with his back to her room, his tailored navy suit jacket unbuttoned, leaning casually against the wall. He was on his phone, but he wasn't speaking into it. He was laughing. Sarah blinked, trying to clear the sweat from her eyes. Was she hallucinating? No. The posture was unmistakable. The The way he ran a hand through his greying hair, a nervous tic he only had when he was closing a deal or lying. Then a woman stepped into the frame. She was tall with platinum blonde hair that fell in perfect waves over a cashmere coat that looked far too expensive for a hospital waiting room visit. Sarah didn't recognize her face, but she recognized the energy. The woman placed a hand on Richard's forearm, a gesture so intimate and possessive that it sent a chill colder than the IV fluid through Sarah's veins. Richard didn't pull away. He leaned in, whispering something into the woman's ear, and then he pulled a small, thick envelope from his inner pocket. Sarah. Sarah. Stay with me. Dr. Reynolds's voice broke her trance. The doctor had arrived looking stern and focused. We need to check your dilation. The heart rates are desynchronizing. We might not have time to wait for your husband. He's outside, Sarah gasped, pointing a trembling finger toward the door. He's with her. Dr. Reynolds frowned, glancing at the door before turning back to his patient. Nurse, close the blinds. We need to focus on these babies. As the nurse moved to shut the blinds, Sarah saw one last thing. The blonde woman was handing Richard a document, a blue legal folder. Richard took it, his face lit up with a greed she had never seen directed at her, not even on their wedding day. He looked at the document, then at the woman, and smiled a predator's smile. The blinds snapped shut, plunging Sarah back into the isolated world of her labor. But the pain in her womb was now matched by a sharper, more vicious pain in her chest. He wasn't just missing the birth, he was conducting business, and Sarah had a terrifying feeling that the business was her. Richard Bennett checked the time on his platinum Rolex, 4:15 p.m. This was taking too long. Sarah had been screaming for hours, and frankly, the noise was distracting him from the most important transaction of his life. He stood in the sterile hallway of the maternity ward, the smell of antiseptic and floor wax, doing nothing to calm his nerves. He adjusted his silk tie, glancing down at the woman standing before him. Jessica Vance was everything Sarah wasn't. She was 24, ambitious, and didn't have stretch marks or swollen ankles. She was also the daughter of the managing partner at his firm's biggest rival, a connection that Richard had been leveraging for 6 months. "Did you bring it?" Richard asked, his voice low. He glanced over his shoulder toward room 304. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the medical staff shouting instructions. But he pushed the guilt down. He was doing this for his future. A future that didn't involve diapers, sleepless nights, or a wife who had become boring and obsessed with fertility. "Of course I brought it, Richard," Jessica purred, opening her designer tote bag. She pulled out a sleek black velvet box and a blue legal folder. "Harry Winston, 3 carats flawless, just like you promised." Richard's eyes widened as she popped the box open. The diamond caught the harsh hospital lights, scattering rainbows across the linoleum floor. It was magnificent. It was also worth $200,000 of money he had quietly siphoned from the joint account he shared with Sarah, specifically the college fund they had started for the triplets. "And the papers?" Richard asked, his eyes tearing away from the ring to the blue folder. "Separation of assets and liability waiver," Jessica said, handing him the folder and a gold Mont Blanc pen. "My father's lawyers drafted it this morning. It states that due to your emotional distress during the birth, you are signing over the deed to the Lake Geneva property to secure its value against market volatility. The beneficiary temporarily is my LLC." Richard smirked. It was genius. Sarah, in her medicated, exhausted state, would sign anything he put in front of her, later trusting him to handle the boring paperwork. But this document he was signing now was the linchpin. It transferred his primary assets out of the marital estate before the babies were even born. By the time Sarah filed for divorce, which he planned to initiate next week, he would technically be broke, and she would get nothing. No alimony. No child support for 3 expensive children. He took the pen. "You're sure this holds up? Ironclad?" Jessica smiled, trailing a manicured finger down his lapel. "Sign it, Richard. Then put this ring on my finger. Make it official. We celebrate tonight while she recovers." Richard looked at the document. Transfer of deed. 4500. Lakeshore Drive. He thought about Sarah. He thought about the 10 years they had spent building that house. He thought about the nursery she had painted yellow just last week, struggling to climb the ladder with her massive belly. He felt a twinge of hesitation, but then he looked at Jessica. He looked at the diamond. He looked at the life of luxury and freedom awaiting him, a life without screaming infants. "You're right," Richard said. He placed the folder against the wall, using the plaster as a desk. The tip of the pen hovered over the signature line. "Hurry," Jessica whispered, glancing around. "Before a nurse sees us." "Mr. Bennett." Richard jumped, capping the pen and spinning around. A young male nurse with tired eyes was standing there, holding a clipboard. "Yeah." Richard snapped, his heart hammering. "What is it?" "Your wife is asking for you, sir. She's fully dilated. It's time to push. You really need to be in there." Richard forced a tight, fake smile. "Of course. I'm just handling a crucial insurance issue for the babies. I'll be there in 2 minutes." The nurse looked at Jessica, then at the velvet box she was hastily trying to shove back into her bag, and then back at Richard. The judgment was palpable. 2 minutes, sir, or you miss the birth of your children." The nurse walked away, his rubber soles squeaking on the floor. "Go," Jessica hissed. "Sign it quickly, then go play the doting father. Meet me at the hotel at 8. Richard turned back to the wall. He uncapped the pen. The adrenaline was intoxicating. He was pulling off the ultimate heist, stealing his own life back from the jaws of domestic oblivion. He scribbled his signature, Richard A. Bennett. "Done," he breathed, handing the folder to Jessica. He took the ring box from her. "Put this on. I want to see it on you before I go in there." Jessica giggled, extending her left hand. Richard slid the massive diamond onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. "I love you," she whispered. "I love us," he corrected, grinning. He turned to head into the delivery room, composing his face into a mask of concerned fatherhood. He checked his reflection in the glass of the fire extinguisher case. He looked worried. He looked devoted. He looked like a man who wasn't about to abandon his wife and 3 newborns for an heiress. He pushed open the door to room 304. The screaming hit him like a physical wall. "Richard!" Sarah cried out, her face red and contorted with effort. She was propped up, legs in stirrups, surrounded by 4 nurses and Dr. Reynolds. "Where were you?" "I'm here, baby, I'm here," Richard said, rushing to her side. He grabbed her hand, the hand that was still wearing her modest gold wedding band, with the same hand that had just slid a diamond onto his mistress's finger. "I was just dealing with the insurance company. They were giving us trouble about the triplet coverage. I had to fix it for us." Sarah looked at him. Her eyes were glazed with pain, but there was a sharpness behind them. She sniffed. "You smell like vanilla," she wheezed between breaths. "And expensive leather." "It's the hospital soap," Richard lied smoothly, patting her hair. Focus, honey. Push. Okay, Sarah, on the next contraction, I need everything you have, Dr. Reynolds commanded, as Sarah bore down, screaming through the agony. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out surreptitiously under the bedsheet. Text from Jessica Papers filed electronically. It's done. The house is ours. Good luck with the brats. Richard smiled. He had won. But he didn't notice the elderly woman sitting in the corner of the room near the incubator. He had been so focused on his performance he hadn't seen her. She was wearing a simple grey volunteer's smock, knitting quietly. She wasn't a volunteer, and as Richard put his phone away, she stopped knitting, pulled out a walkie-talkie from her yarn bag, and whispered one word. Now. The double doors to the delivery suite burst open. It wasn't more doctors. It was 2 uniformed police officers and a tall, imposing man in a black trench coat who looked like he had walked straight out of a nightmare. Richard Bennett, the man in the trench coat, boomed his voice, drowning out even the beeping monitors. Richard froze Sarah's hand, going limp in his. Who the hell are you? My wife is in labor. I know, the man said, stepping forward, his eyes cold as steel. And you are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. What? Richard laughed nervously, looking at Sarah. Sarah, tell them to get out. This is insane. But Sarah wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the man in the trench coat, and for the first time in hours, she didn't look in pain. She looked relieved. Hello, Uncle Harry, she whispered. Richard's blood ran cold. Uncle Harry Sarah didn't have an Uncle Harry. She was an orphan. Unless... The man reached into his coat and pulled out a badge, followed by a folded piece of paper. I'm Judge Harold Thompson, the man said, looming over Richard. Family court, and Sarah's godfather. And you, Richard, just signed a document transferring assets to a known shell company, monitored by the FBI. Richard looked at the door. Jessica was gone. The ring was gone. And suddenly the walls of the delivery room felt very, very close. Get him out of here, Sarah said, her voice suddenly strong, her grip on the bed rail tightening. I have to give birth, and I don't want a criminal in the room. The officers moved in handcuffs, clicking ominously. Wait. You can't do this. I'm the father, Richard screamed as they grabbed his arms. Not anymore, Judge Thompson said, crossing his arms. Now you're just a defendant. Richard was dragged backward toward the door, his heels skidding on the linoleum, just as the cry of the first baby filled the room. The metal table in Interrogation Room B at the 1st District Precinct was bolted to the floor, much like Richard Bennett's current reality. He had been sitting there for 2 hours, still wearing his expensive suit, though his tie had been confiscated as a suicide risk. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency. He wasn't worried, not really. He was Richard Bennett. He fixed broken companies, he negotiated million-dollar buyouts. A domestic dispute with a hysterical wife and a meddling godfather judge was a hiccup, not a catastrophe. He would smooth this over. The heavy door buzzed and swung open. Richard straightened up, expecting a public defender or perhaps his corporate attorney. Instead, a woman walked in. She was sharp-featured, wearing a charcoal pantsuit that cost more than his car and carrying a leather briefcase. Finally, Richard scoffed, leaning back. I don't know who sent you, but get me out of here. This is a misunderstanding. My wife is hormonal, and her godfather is abusing his judicial power. The woman didn't sit. She placed the briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. "I'm not here to get you out, Mr. Bennett. I'm Assistant District Attorney Joyce Halloway, and I'm here to finalize the terms of your arraignment." Richard laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. "Arraignment for what? Signing a document? That's a civil matter." "It would be," Halloway said, sliding a photo across the table. "If the company you transferred the assets to Sterling Holdings, LLC, wasn't a front for a money laundering operation the FBI has been tracking for 2 years. Richard stared at the photo. It was a surveillance shot of Jessica. She was sitting at a cafe in Paris, laughing with a man Richard didn't recognize, a man with a thick scar running down his cheek. "Jessica," Richard whispered. "No. Her father is a partner at Caldwell & Sons. She's a socialite. Jessica Caldwell is a con artist named Brenda Miller," Halloway corrected, her voice void of sympathy. "She targets mid-level executives with high asset liquidity and marital problems. She convinces them to protect their assets by signing them over to her shell companies. Then she vanishes. You weren't securing your future, Richard. You were being liquidated." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "No, she loves me. She gave me." He looked down at his empty hands. The police had taken his phone wallet and keys. "She bought me a Rolex. With your own money," Halloway said, dropping a stack of bank statements on the table. "She hacked your accounts 3 months ago. The investments you thought were tanking. That was her siphoning funds. The ring you put on her finger, charged to a credit line opened in your name last week. You paid for your own affair, and you paid for the rock she's going to fence." "Where is she?" Richard's voice cracked. "Tell me you caught her." "We didn't have to catch her," Halloway said, a small, grim smile touching her lips. "She walked right into it." 5 miles away at O'Hare International Airport, the karma Richard had unknowingly summoned was playing out in the first-class lounge. Jessica, or Brenda as the authorities knew, her sipped a glass of champagne, checking her reflection in her compact mirror. The ring on her finger sparkled violently under the lounge lights. She had a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands, leaving in 45 minutes. The deed Richard had signed was already digitized and sent to her offshore broker. By tomorrow, the Bennett family home would be sold to a holding company, and she would be $500,000 richer. She checked her phone. No texts from Richard. He was probably still playing daddy at the hospital, oblivious that his life had just been torched. "Passenger Jessica Caldwell, please report to the concierge desk," the intercom announced softly. Jessica sighed, finishing her drink. Probably an upgrade. She grabbed her Louis Vuitton tote, packed with $50 to $1,000 in cash she had withdrawn from Richard's safe that morning, and sauntered to the desk. "Yes?" she asked the young woman at the counter, flashing a dazzling smile. "Is there an issue with my seat?" "No, ma'am," the agent said, looking past her. "But these gentlemen would like a word." Jessica spun around. Standing there were 2 agents in windbreakers emblazoned with FBI. "Jessica Caldwell?" the older agent asked. "Yes." She clutched her bag tighter. "We have a warrant for your arrest regarding wire fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." "This is ridiculous," she shrieked, her poise shattering instantly. Heads turned in the lounge. "Do you know who my father is?" "We know your father is a retired mechanic in Ohio named Frank," the agent said, stepping forward. "And we know about the deed. And the ring." Jessica bolted. It was a desperate, stupid move. She threw her tote bag at the agent and sprinted toward the escalators. She made it about 10 yards before a younger female officer, who had been posing as a traveler reading a magazine, tackled her to the carpet. The impact knocked the wind out of her. As she was hauled to her feet, handcuffs biting into her wrists, The contents of her bag lay scattered on the floor, stacks of cash, multiple passports, and the blue legal folder. "My ring!" she screamed as they dragged her away, thrashing and kicking. "Don't scratch the ring." "Don't worry," the agent said, picking up the velvet box that had tumbled out. "It's going into evidence, right next to your confession." Back in the interrogation room, Richard listened to Holloway describe the arrest. He didn't feel relief. He felt a crushing, suffocating weight. He had thrown away his wife, his children, and his home for a phantom. "So," Richard whispered, head in his hands, "I'm a victim. You have to let me go. I was scammed." Holloway closed her briefcase. "You were scammed, yes, but you also willingly signed a document intended to defraud your wife and children of their legal assets. You attempted to hide money from a divorce court. That's fraud, Richard. And Judge Thompson is making sure the book isn't just thrown at you. He wants the whole library dropped on your head." She knocked on the door to be let out. "Wait," Richard pleaded. Standing up, the chains of his handcuffs rattling against the table. "Can I at least see my children, please?" Holloway paused at the door, looking back at him with pure disgust. "The babies are in the NICU, Mr. Bennett. They are fighting to breathe because their mother was under extreme stress induced by your actions. The only person you're going to see is your cellmate." The door slammed shut, leaving Richard alone with the hum of the lights and the ruin of his own making. 36 hours had passed since the delivery. The recovery room at St. Mary's was quiet, bathed in the soft morning light filtering through the blinds. Sarah Bennett sat upright in bed, wincing as she adjusted her position. The C-section scar was a fresh, burning line across her abdomen, a reminder of the chaotic surgery that had followed Richard's arrest. But the pain was secondary to the warmth in her arms. She was holding baby A boy she had named Leo. He was tiny, hooked up to a small nasal cannula, but he was stable. The other two, a girl named Maya and another boy named Sam, were sleeping in the NICU incubators down the hall, monitored by a fleet of nurses who treated Sarah like a queen. The door creaked open. Sarah stiffened, expecting a nurse, or perhaps Judge Thompson returning with more legal updates. Instead, a woman swept into the room, bringing with her a cloud of heavy floral perfume that instantly made Sarah nauseous. "Well," the woman said, her voice sharp and icy, "you look terrible." It was Evelyn Bennett, Richard's mother. Evelyn was a woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and believed that appearances were the only currency that mattered. She stood at the foot of the bed, clutching her handbag with a death grip, her eyes scanning the room with disdain. "Hello, Evelyn," Sarah said, her voice raspy but steady. She instinctively pulled Leo closer to her chest. "I didn't expect you." "Clearly," Evelyn snapped. "I had to hear about my grandchildren from a police scanner app my bridge partner uses. Can you imagine the humiliation? Richard Bennett arrested in maternity ward. It's all over the local news blogs." "Richard broke the law, Evelyn. He tried to steal our home." "Oh, please." Evelyn waved a dismissal hand, walking around the side of the bed. "Richard made a mistake. He's a man under pressure. He has a business to run. He was probably just trying to protect the family assets from unnecessary taxation. He says he was tricked by that harlot. He was sleeping with her, Evelyn, for 6 months, while I was doing IVF injections." Evelyn stopped looming over Sarah. Her face was hard, a mask of denial. "Men have needs, Sarah. If you were more attentive, perhaps he wouldn't have strayed. But that is beside the point. I am here to fix this mess." Sarah felt a surge of anger so hot it nearly overrode the pain meds. "Fix it, Richard is in jail." "For now," Evelyn said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a document. "I have spoken to our family attorney. We are prepared to post Richard's bail. It's substantial, but I will manage. However, the judge, that godfather of yours, has placed a restraining order on Richard. It looks very bad for his defense." She thrust the paper toward Sarah. "I need you to sign this. It's a statement recanting your claim of distress. You will say you knew about the asset transfer, that it was a mutual decision for tax purposes, and that the Mistress was a business associate you hadn't met. If you do that, the fraud charges drop. Richard comes home, and we can be a family again." Sarah stared at the paper. It was a lifeline for Richard, a way to sweep it all under the rug, to go back to the lie. "And if I don't?" Sarah asked quietly. Evelyn's eyes narrowed into slits. "Sarah, be realistic. You are unemployed. You have 3 high-needs infants. You have no family. If you send Richard to prison, you will be destitute. I will sue for custody. I have the money, the house, and the resources to raise these children properly. You will be the bitter ex-wife living in a studio apartment." Evelyn leaned down, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Sign the paper. Bring my son home, or I will spend every last dime of the Bennett inheritance to make sure you never see those babies again." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Sarah looked down at Leo. He was sleeping, his tiny hand curled into a fist. He looked just like Richard, but he also looked like her. Sarah took a deep breath. She looked at the paper, then back at Evelyn. "No." Evelyn blinked, stunned. "Excuse me." I said no. Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm not signing anything. And you're wrong about one thing, Evelyn. I'm not unemployed." "Don't be daft. You quit your teaching job 2 years ago." "I did?" Sarah nodded. "To focus on my writing." Richard laughed at it. He called it a hobby. He never even asked what I was writing. Sarah reached for the remote on her bedside table and turned on the small TV mounted on the wall. It was tuned to CNBC. "Turn that off," Evelyn hissed. "Just watch," Sarah commanded. On the screen, a breaking news banner flashed. Mystery author S.J. Rains revealed as local mom in billion-dollar deal. The news anchor was speaking excitedly. In a stunning turn of events, the anonymous author of the best-selling thriller series, The Corporate Widow, which was just optioned by Netflix for a record-breaking 8-figure sum, has been identified as Chicago resident Sarah Bennett. Her publishers have confirmed the deal was signed 3 days ago. Evelyn stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open. She looked back at Sarah, who was smiling a cold, fierce smile. "I signed the contract the morning my water broke, Evelyn. The advance alone is more than Richard has made in his entire career. I don't need his money. I don't need your house. And I certainly don't need a husband who sells me out for a fake diamond." Sarah pressed the call button for the nurse. "I have the best lawyers in the city on retainer now. If you try to sue for custody, I will bury you in legal fees until you have to sell your pearls to buy cat food." The door opened, and a large male orderly stepped in. "Everything okay, Mrs. Bennett?" "No," Sarah said. Her eyes locked on her mother-in-law. "This woman is upsetting the babies. Please remove her, and ensure she is taken off the approved visitor list. Permanently." Evelyn sputtered, clutching her chest. You ungrateful." "Goodbye, Evelyn," Sarah said, turning her attention back to her son. As the orderly firmly guided a protesting Evelyn out of the room, Sarah kissed Leo's forehead. The fear she had felt for years, fear of Richard leaving, Fear of not having enough fear of being alone was gone. It had been replaced by something much stronger. She was a mother. She was a millionaire. And she was finally free. But as the door closed, Sarah knew it wasn't over. Richard was desperate, and Evelyn was vindictive. And there was still one person Sarah hadn't accounted for. Someone who had been watching Richard's downfall from the shadows. Someone who had sent Judge Thompson that text message in the delivery room. Her phone buzzed on the tray table. A notification from an unknown number. Review the security footage from the parking garage. You're not the only one Richard stole from. Sarah stared at the text message on her phone, the glow of the screen illuminating her tired face in the dim hospital room. Review the security footage from the parking garage. The number was blocked. No ID. "Who is it?" Judge Thompson asked. He had returned to the room with 2 cups of coffee, looking more like a concerned grandfather than a terrifying instrument of justice. He set the cups down and looked at the screen. "I don't know," Sarah said, her thumb hovering over the screen. "But they know about the parking garage. Richard said he was moving the car. That's why he was gone for so long before she showed up." Thompson frowned, his bushy grey eyebrows knitting together. "Richard drives a Tesla Model X. It has Sentry mode. But if he was doing something he didn't want seen, he would have disabled the internal cameras. However," he pulled out his own phone, "St. Mary's security is run by a private firm. I signed their renewal contract last month. I can get us access." 20 minutes later, a heavy-set security chief named Miller walked into the room holding a tablet. He looked nervous to be in the presence of a judge, especially one currently sitting in a maternity ward armchair. "We pulled the footage from level B2, Judge," Miller said, handing the tablet to Thompson. Sarah leaned over to watch. Timestamp is 2:15 p.m., 2 hours before the arrest. On the grainy black-and-white screen, Richard's sleek car pulled into a secluded corner spot far away from the elevators. Richard got out. He looked around, nervously checking the shadows. He wasn't on his phone. He walked to the trunk, popped it open, and lifted the floor panel where the charging cables usually sat. He pulled out a heavy metallic briefcase. "That's not his gym bag," Sarah whispered. Richard didn't take the briefcase into the hospital. Instead, he walked over to a concrete pillar that had a maintenance panel on it. He used a small key to open the panel and electrical access box, shoved the briefcase inside, and locked it back up. He then smoothed his suit, checked his reflection in the car window, and walked toward the elevators to go meet his mistress. He hid it. Thompson said, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't trust the mistress and he didn't trust you. He stashed his insurance policy. "What's in the case?" Sarah asked. "Let's find out," Thompson said, standing up. "Miller, have your men open that panel. Bring the contents directly to me. Do not open it. Do not pass. Go." 30 minutes later, the briefcase was sitting on Sarah's hospital bed tray. It was a heavy fireproof lockbox. Thompson used a pair of bolt cutters from the maintenance crew to snap the lock. Inside there was no money. There were 3 hard drives and a stack of leather-bound notebooks. Thompson put on a pair of latex gloves and opened the top notebook. He read the first page, and his face went pale. He flipped to the next, then the next. "What is it, Uncle Harry?" Sarah asked, fear spiking in her chest. "It's not just embezzlement," Thompson said, closing the book with a snap. "It's leverage. Richard wasn't just stealing from his company. He was laundering money for city officials' construction magnates, even a few dirty cops. He kept a ledger. Every bribe, every payoff, every illicit deal." He looked at Sarah, his eyes grave. "This is a dead man's switch. If he gets arrested, he threatens to release this to take everyone down with him. That's why he was so arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable because he holds the keys to half the city's closets." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. If he has powerful friends, is he going to get out? As if on cue, Thompson's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and then slammed the phone down on the table so hard the screen cracked. "He made bail," Thompson growled. "What?" Sarah gasped. "But you said it was denied." "It was." Thompson paced the room, furious. "But a higher court judge, Judge Reynolds, whose name I just saw in this notebook, granted an emergency bail hearing 10 minutes ago. Richard is out. His mother posted the $5 million. "He's coming for the babies," Sarah whispered, clutching the bedsheets. "No," Thompson said, grabbing the briefcase. "He's coming for this, and he's coming for your money. But we have the evidence now. I need to get this to the FBI, specifically to a contact in D.C. who isn't on Richard's payroll." Suddenly, Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "He knows you have the case. He's not coming to the hospital. He's going to the press. Turn on Channel 5. Sarah grabbed the remote. Richard Bennett stood on the steps of the grandiose Cook County Courthouse, a free man. His suit was fresh. Evelyn had brought a tailor to the jail, and his hair was perfectly coiffed. Beside him stood Evelyn, looking like a stoic matriarch, and Victor Drax, a defense attorney known in legal circles as the Viper. A sea of microphones was thrust in his face. "Mr. Bennett, did you steal the money? Did you abandon your wife?" a reporter shouted. Richard looked directly into the camera, his eyes welling with practiced tears. He looked broken. He looked like a victim. "I love my wife," Richard said, his voice trembling. "I love my children. What happened yesterday was a psychotic break, but not mine." The crowd quieted. "My wife, Sra," Richard paused, wiping a tear. "She has been suffering from severe mental instability for years. She created a fantasy world. She writes fiction thrillers about murder and betrayal. You may know her as S.J. Rains." A murmur went through the crowd. He had just outed her pseudonym to the world. "She has been plotting this for months," Richard continued, his voice gaining strength. "She framed me. She planted the evidence. She hired an actress to pose as a mistress, to cause a scene in the hospital, to gain sympathy for her upcoming book launch. I was disoriented, medicated for anxiety, and coerced into signing papers I didn't understand." "Liar," someone shouted from the back, but Richard ignored them. "We are filing a countersuit today." Victor Drax stepped in, his voice oily and smooth. "We are suing for full custody of the triplets, citing Sarah Bennett's mental incompetence. Furthermore, since the S.J. Rains book deal was signed during the marriage, the intellectual property is a marital asset. We have obtained an emergency injunction to freeze all of Sarah Bennett's accounts, including the Netflix advance, until the divorce is settled." Sarah watched from her hospital bed, horror washing over her. "He froze the money," she whispered. "He froze the book money." Just then, Dr. Reynolds rushed into the room. He didn't look happy. "Sarah, we have a problem," he said gently. "Baby B. Maya. Her heart valve isn't closing. We need to do the surgery. Tonight." "Do it," Sarah said immediately. "Whatever she needs." "The issue is—" Dr. Reynolds hesitated, looking at his clipboard. "The specialist we need is Dr. Aris. He's the best in the country, but he's out of network, and requires an upfront deposit for the device. It's $60,000. I have it, Sarah said. I have millions. Charge the card on file. We tried, Dr. Reynolds said softly. It was declined. The bank says the assets are frozen by a court order. Sarah felt the room spin. Richard wasn't just greedy. He was lethal. He had frozen her accounts, knowing she had high-risk babies in the NICU. He was squeezing her. I'll pay it, Judge Thompson barked. I'll write a check right now. I can't accept a personal check from a sitting judge involved in the case, Harry, Dr. Reynolds said, looking pained. It's a conflict of interest. The hospital board would fire me, and the surgery would be invalidated legally. Richard's lawyers would have a field day. So my daughter dies. Sarah's voice was a low, terrifying growl. Because Richard wants half of a book he never read. No, a voice came from the doorway. They all turned. Standing there was a man in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. He was pale, thin, and looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He wore a faded hospital gown. It was the man from the text messages. I'm Simon Kress, the man wheezed. Richard's former CFO. I'm in room 402, terminal pancreatic cancer. Richard fired me the day I was diagnosed so he wouldn't have to pay out my life insurance. Simon coughed, holding up a phone. I was the one who texted you. I saw him hide the case, and I saw the news just now. He looked at Sarah. I don't have much time left, maybe a week, but I have a secret account, an offshore account Richard asked me to set up for him in the Caymans, but I never gave him the access codes. I kept it as my own insurance. Simon smiled a weak, skeletal grin. There's $2 million in there. Stolen money. Yes, but technically it's not Richard's because his name isn't on it, and it's not mine because I'm dead on paper already. He handed Sarah a slip of paper with a routing number and a password. Transfer it directly to the hospital, Simon said. Pay for the surgery. Pay for the best lawyers in the world. And then, Simon looked at Thompson. Open the third hard drive in that briefcase, the one labeled Project Icarus. It proves Richard knew about the faulty concrete used in the West Side Orphanage project, the one that collapsed last year. Thompson's eyes went wide. He knew. He supplied it, Simon said. To save 4%, 3 kids died. Richard called it acceptable margin of error. Sarah took the slip of paper. Her hand wasn't shaking anymore. She looked at Dr. Reynolds. Get the billing department down here. Now! She turned to the TV, where Richard was still smiling for the cameras, playing the role of the grieving, wronged husband. You want a villain, Richard? Sarah whispered to the screen. You're about to meet the author who writes them. Uncle Harry, Sarah said, her voice turning to steel. Call your contact in D.C. Tell them to bring a SWAT team. I don't just want him arrested. I want him destroyed. Thompson smiled a predatory grin that matched his goddaughter's. With pleasure. But Richard had one last card to play. As the cameras flashed, he pulled a young woman from the crowd, not Jessica, but a nanny. I'm also petitioning for immediate emergency custody, Richard announced. As Sarah is unfit and financially frozen, I am taking the children home to my estate, where they can be cared for properly. He held up a court order signed by Judge Reynolds. I'm going to the hospital now to collect my children. Sarah heard it through the TV. She looked at the door of her room. She looked at the NICU down the hall where Maya was fighting for her life. He's coming here, Sarah said. Thompson stood up and buttoned his coat. He moved to the door and locked it. Let him come, Thompson said. He thinks he's walking into a nursery. He's walking into a war zone. The automatic doors of St. Mary's Memorial Hospital hissed open, admitting a gust of wind and Richard Bennett. He walked with the stride of a conqueror, flanked by his mother, Evelyn, his lawyer Victor Drax, and two bewildered county sheriff's deputies he had summoned to enforce his emergency custody order. Behind them, a cameraman from a local tabloid, paid for by Evelyn, scuttled along, capturing the heartbroken father's rescue mission. Richard didn't care about the babies. He cared about the optics. Taking the children made him the primary parent. It gave him leverage over the Netflix money. It won the war. He marched past the reception desk, ignoring the protests of the security guard. "I have a court order. Get out of my way." They reached the double doors of the NICU. The red, restricted access sign glared at them. Richard turned to the camera, composing his face into a mask of righteous indignation. "My children are being held hostage by an unstable woman," he declared for the lens. "I am going in to save them." He pushed the doors open. He expected to see nurses cowering. He expected to see Sarah crying in a corner. Instead, he walked into a wall of silence. The NICU corridor was empty of medical staff, save for one person. Sarah Bennett stood in the center of the hallway. She wasn't wearing a hospital gown anymore. She was dressed in a simple tracksuit, standing tall despite the stitches in her stomach. Her arms were crossed. Behind her stood Judge Harry Thompson, leaning on a cane, and Dr. Reynolds. "Step aside, Sarah," Richard said, his voice echoing off the sterile tiles. He waved the paper. "I have an order signed by Judge Reynolds. Immediate custody. I'm taking them. All of them." "You're not taking anyone," Sarah said, her voice eerily calm. "Maya is in surgery. Dr. Aris is operating right now." Richard sneered. "Dr. Aris. He costs a fortune. Your accounts are frozen. Who paid for it?" "I did," a raspy voice called out. Richard froze. He looked to the side. Sitting in a wheelchair in the doorway of a supply closet was Simon Kress. The former CFO looked like a ghost, but his eyes were burning with hate. "Simon," Richard whispered, the color draining from his face. You're supposed to be dead." "Not yet," Simon coughed. "Not until I see you burn." Richard's lawyer, Drax, stepped forward nervously. "This doesn't matter. The custody order is absolute. Deputies arrest Mrs. Bennett for custodial interference." The two deputies hesitated, looking at Judge Thompson. "I wouldn't do that, gentlemen," Thompson said, his voice deep and rumbling. "You have no jurisdiction here, Harry," Evelyn screeched, clutching her pearls. "You're a family court judge. This is a civil matter." "Actually," Thompson said, reaching into his jacket, "it's not civil anymore. It ceased to be civil the moment we opened the third hard drive in Richard's little lockbox." Richard's knees buckled slightly. He grabbed the wall for support. You opened it. Project Icarus," Sarah said, stepping forward. The anger she had been holding back for days finally surfaced cold and sharp. "The West Side Orphanage. You supplied substandard concrete to your own construction firm's subsidiary to skim 4% off the top. You knew the load-bearing walls were weak. You signed the safety inspection yourself." The cameraman, sensing the shift, zoomed in on Richard's sweating face. That's a lie," Richard stammered. "Paperwork error." 3 children died when that roof collapsed, Richard," Sarah said, her voice cracking with fury. 3. Just like the 3 I just brought into the world. You killed children for profit, and you tried to steal mine to cover your legal fees." "Allegations!" Drax shouted, trying to block the camera. "We are leaving. This is entrapment. "You're not going anywhere!" a voice boomed from the other end of the hall. The elevator doors at the end of the corridor opened. It wasn't more doctors. It was a tactical team. 6 FBI agents in body armor poured into the hallway, weapons drawn, but pointed at the floor. Leading them was a woman in a sharp blazer, Agent Miller, from the DC Fraud Division. "Richard Bennett," Agent Miller announced, flashing her badge. "You are under arrest for 3 counts of involuntary manslaughter, racketeering, and federal wire fraud." "No," Evelyn screamed, grabbing Richard's arm. "He is a good boy. He didn't know it was the contractors. We have the emails, Mrs. Bennett," Thompson said, holding up a flash drive. "Sent from Richard's private server to the concrete supplier. Subject line, 'Cut the mix. Nobody will check the orphanage.'" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the slimy lawyer, Drax, slowly backed away from Richard, creating distance between himself and his client. Richard looked around wildly. The walls were closing in. He looked at Sarah. "Sarah, please." He begged, the tears real this time. Tears of a man who realized his life was over. "I'm the father of your children. Don't let them take me. I can fix this. We can make a deal. I'll give you everything." Sarah walked up to him. She stood inches from the man she had vowed to love forever. She looked at his designer suit, his terrified eyes, his hollow soul. "You have nothing to give me, Richard," she said softly. "You're bankrupt, morally and financially." She reached out and plucked the silk handkerchief from his breast pocket. "And by the way," she whispered, leaning in so only he could hear, "my book, the one you wanted half of, it's dedicated to you. It's about a man who loses everything because he underestimated his wife. The ending is quite permanent." "Cuff him," Agent Miller ordered. The agents swarmed. Richard was slammed against the wall, his hands wrenched behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound Sarah had ever heard. "Mother! Do something!" Richard screamed as he was hauled away. Evelyn stood, trembling. Agent Miller turned to her. "Evelyn Bennett." "Yes," she squeaked. "We have records showing the $5 million used for Richard's bail came from an account linked to the orphanage kickbacks. That makes you an accessory to money laundering." Evelyn fainted. She hit the floor with a thud, but nobody moved to help her except the deputies, who simply knelt to arrest her while she was unconscious. As the chaos receded, Richard dragging his feet and screaming Evelyn being carted off on a stretcher in handcuffs, the hallway fell quiet. Simon Kress, the dying man in the wheelchair, let out a long, ragged breath. He gave Sarah a thumbs up, then closed his eyes, finally, at peace. Sarah turned to Judge Thompson. The old man was smiling, tears in his eyes. "It's over, kiddo," he said. Just then the doors to the operating theater swung open. Dr. Harris stepped out, pulling down his mask. He looked tired, but triumphant. "Mrs. Bennett." Sarah's heart stopped. "Yes, the surgery was a complete success." Dr. Harris smiled. "The valve is repaired. Maya is going to be just fine. She's a fighter, just like her mother." Sarah fell to her knees, sobbing. Not from pain, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of gratitude. 6 months later, Sarah sat on the porch of a beautiful farmhouse in the countryside, a house she bought with her own money. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the yard. In the playpen on the grass, Leo, Sam, and Maya were rolling around healthy and happy. Maya had a faint scar on her chest, a badge of honor. Sarah's laptop was open on the table. She typed the final words of her sequel hit, Send, and closed the computer. She picked up her glass of iced tea and looked at the newspaper sitting on the table. Headline: Bennett sentenced to 40 years. Assets liquidated for victims' families. She didn't feel happy about it. She didn't feel sad. She just felt finished. She looked at her babies. They didn't have a father, but they had a mother who would burn the world down to keep them warm, and that she realized was more than enough. Sarah took a sip of tea, smiled at the sunset, and finally truly breathed. This story isn't just about a cheating husband. It's a reminder that the people we underestimate are often the ones who hold the power. Richard thought Sarah was just a hormonal wife, but she was the architect of his destruction. He chased fool's gold and lost the real treasure, his family. In the end, karma didn't just hit him, it buried him. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, ultimate revenge and justice served cold, please hit that like button. Right now, it really helps the channel. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that the truth always comes out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. What would you have done in Sarah's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.